I rise this morning to speak about the widening dimensions of the slaughter in Syria. A country of 23 million people, a proud country, is being transformed before our eyes into a land of rubble, skeletons, refugees, and ghosts. 3 million Syrians have fled to neighboring countries. That number will likely exceed 4 million by year end. Nearly 7 million Syrians are refugees within their own country, driven from their homes by the atrocities of the Assad regime. More than 130,000 innocent people have lost their lives during a 3-year civil war. We're witnessing one of the greatest humanitarian crises since World War II, and it can be stopped. Nearly 7 million Syrians are displaced within their own country. More than 9 million Syrians need humanitarian aid, but they've not been able to receive basic humanitarian aid, food and medicine, due to the actions of the Bashar al-Assad regime and also due to the complicity of the regime's patron, Russia. The denial of humanitarian aid is a war crime, pure and simple. Thousands are dying of starvation. Cases of tuberculosis, polio, typhoid, and other diseases are expanding at an exponential rate. And none of this is an accident. The Assad regime is using forced starvation and forced sieges as a weapon to destroy the Syrian people. Now, the primary architect of these crimes is Bashar al-Assad, but he has a patron who funds and supports what he does and who has the ability to stop the atrocities. Russia is Assad's principal support. And since the start of the Syrian civil war, Russia has shown it is complicit in these war crimes, but it is also capable of stopping them. In the United Nations, Russia has used its veto power and threat of veto on the Security Council numerous times to block international action to help the Syrian people. 3 of these vetoes were used, Mr. President, to block basic humanitarian aid. What possible reason could any civilized nation have to deny war victims food and medical supplies? When the eyes of the world were on it in the middle of the Olympics last week, it finally joined in with the rest of the world in calling on Syria to allow aid to its people. In the aftermath of that resolution, the real test lies ahead, because those were words on paper, and now we must see whether the aid will be delivered, because this is the situation in Syria today. This is a recent photo from a suburb of Damascus that has been under siege by the Assad regime without access to food and basic medical care. Witness this photo. Look at the destruction, look at the rubble, look at the throng of hungry people stretching to oblivion in the distance. See the hunger in their faces and bodies, and look at the questions in their eyes. It is incumbent upon the Syrian regime to allow unhindered access of humanitarian aid to all Syrians. Opposition groups have that same obligation. But, Mr. President, in conclusion, let me say a final word about Russian responsibility to respond to these poor Syrian people. When the Russian government and their people see this picture, it should remind them of their own history. During the siege of Leningrad during World War II, the Nazis deliberately used these same techniques and tactics, forced starvation and siege, as a tactic of war to cause horrible deprivation to the Russian population of that city. Russians should look in the eyes of these victims of intentional starvation and grapple with their responsibility to them. Russia can cause the Assad regime, just as it did in August, to open access so that these people can have food and medicine. Russia has finally agreed to words on paper at the UN, but the world will watch the actions of this nation.